Hey everyone, it's Carissa Wiley at sprinkledwithglitter.com. Thanks for joining me today. Today's video was previously featured on the Altenew YouTube channel, but I thought you would enjoy seeing it here as well. Today I'm going to show you how to create some embossed and textured backgrounds with an embossing folder and a die. Both of today's cards feature some brand new products from the October release from Altenew, including the Petalcraft layering die set. I'll also be featuring the Botanical Rails 3D embossing folder along with another die set that you'll find later in this video. I'm starting out with the Petalcraft die set, and you can see both of the flowers in this. All of the dies that you need for each flower are contained on one die, which makes sorting this out really easily. I'm die cutting all of these pieces from white cardstock, and I'm using my perfect picker tool to help me kind of poke them out of the die or poke out the inner pieces. And once I have all of my die cuts created, you can see I die cut this several times. I'm going to lay them out on my 9x12 ultra sticky mat, and I'm going to do some ink blending. So for half of the pieces, I'm using pale mauve and blending over the entire area of these white die cuts with a large ink blending brush. And for the other half, I'm using the amethyst color. Now this is the first flower of the two styles of flower here. You're going to see that I'm also using yellow ochre for the centers of both flowers. Now, once I have all of the pieces for the first flower blended, I'm also going to blend the colors for the second flower. One of them has a more rounded kind of petal shape, the other one a more pointed petal shape. Again, using yellow ochre for the centers, but for these, I'm going to make them kind of a pale blue color. So I'm starting out with Misty Morning for half of the pieces here, and then I will blend over the other half with the Cloudy Sky ink color. This set of blues, it's called the Tranquility set of fresh dye inks, is one of my favorite blues in all of my stash. The Petalcraft system is a keyhole die system, and Altenew has done a great job with these keyhole die sets. It makes layering these up a breeze. You're going to add a little bit of liquid glue around that opening and then line up all of those keyholes. Now, some of them are actually a keyhole shape. Some of them are a arrow shape. All of them have a little bit different shape, and that kind of helps you determine which pieces go with which. And so all of the openings on this single floral here will match up and they'll line up. And you can see I'm just stacking them up to create my first floral, which has the more pointed tips on the petals. Now I'm also going to show you how to assemble the second floral. It's going to work the exact same way. Now, one thing I like to do with a little floral like this is kind of fluff up the little petal pieces to give it a little more dimension. So this is flower shape number 2. You can see all of the openings for this flower shape are a little bit different, but they're all going to match up and line up. So I'm going to, again, add some liquid glue around the openings and then make sure each of these keyholes lines up with the previous. They are numbered to help you kind of know what order to place these in. And on the back of the packaging, you'll find a guide for layering them as well. I'm going to go ahead and fluff up all of the petal pieces on this flower as well to give it even more dimension. And I just repeated this process to assemble 5 of each of these floral pieces. I'm grabbing some instant dimension foam tape. This is the 1/8 inch thick instant dimension foam tape. You can see it has a lot of loft, and I'm going to add a small piece to the back side of each of these florals so they're ready to go on the front of the card. If you don't want them to have quite as much dimension, you can use the 1/16 inch depth instead. I'm using the Botanical Rails 3D embossing folder to emboss some brushed silver cardstock. I end up changing this out, so I'm going to show you this again in just a bit. And in the meantime, I'm also going to use the Enchanted Vines die set. This is a brand new die set, and I'm die cutting it from some VELLUM. I'm being very careful to remove this from the die, and then I'm going to actually take this and trim it down into some various pieces that I can use kind of individually. This one piece I will use on both cards. So I only die cut this once, but I was able to get a couple of card projects out of it. When I started laying out all of the elements, I felt like the brushed silver cardstock was a little too much. And so I'm going to instead take a piece of evening gray cardstock and I'm going to line it up in the Botanical Rails 3D embossing folder. You can see I'm centering it up here. I am using an Anna Griffin Empress. So I'm using an A plate on the bottom, then my embossing folder with the cardstock and the magnetic shim on top. That gives me a perfect emboss with these 3D embossing folders and the Anna Griffin Empress machine. If you don't have an Empress machine, I recommend that you look at your die cut manual to determine what sandwich you need for a 3D embossing folder. You can see I'm arranging my vellum pieces along the right side of this card front, and I'm actually just using the foam adhesive that's on the back of these florals to hold those vellum pieces in place. This is going to keep me from having any glue marks or adhesive that you can see through on the front of the card. I sprinkled some of the stellar sequins in the Dazzling Diamonds color throughout this little arrangement here to give it, of course, a touch of sparkle. And I'm just using some liquid glue and my Perfect Picker tool to position those onto the card front. Now it's time for a sentiment, and I went back to an old set in my stash. This Warm Hugs greeting is from the Pumpkin Patch stamp set. It has a coordinating die set. I'm stamping it onto some vellum using some embossing ink, and then I'm sprinkling on some silver embossing powder, and I'm heat setting that. Then I'll use the coordinating die to die cut this out. I'm going to grab my Instant Dimension foam tape again, cut down some really small pieces and hide it behind that embossing. And that's what I'm going to use to adhere this sentiment to my card front. This allows me to just hide all of that adhesive behind the embossing and use it to my advantage. Now, when you have a card front like this that has a lot of dimension, and this dimension can go a really long way in making a simple card look complete and full, it can be a little difficult to adhere these to a card front. So I recommend some Instant Dimension foam tape. That's really going to keep this adhered down to your card front. I'm using the 1-inch wide Instant Dimension foam tape. It's 1/16 inch thick. And I know that that foam adhesive is going to keep this card front adhered to this white side folding A2 size card base. That finishes off card number 1. So let's get into card number 2. And we're going to use a die to do some texture or debossing on the card front. So I have the Enchanted Vines die here. I'm positioning my white cardstock behind the die. You can follow your die cut machine's guide for embossing with a die, but for the Empress, I'm using an A plate. The silicone mat, I have my cardstock and my die, and notice that the die is facing the silicone mat, or the blade side is facing the silicone mat. And then I finished off that sandwich with another A plate, ran that through my die cut machine, and now I am able to make an impression with that die. So we have 2 different ways of really creating texture and dimension on these very simple card fronts. I chose a greeting from the Versatile Greetings 2 die set. I've die cut the Congrats from some brushed silver cardstock and the shadow layer from some vellum. I'm just using some liquid glue to adhere those layers together. And then once again, I have the rest of that vellum piece that I die cut using the Enchanted Vines die set. And I'm holding that in place on my cardstock using those Petalcraft florals and the foam adhesive that's on the back. I'm positioning all of these pieces onto the card front using some foam adhesive. And then once again, I'll use the 1-inch wide Instant Dimension foam tape to adhere this very textured and dimensional card front to the layer behind it. I've layered it up with some brushed silver cardstock, and then I'm placing that onto some evening gray cardstock using some tape runner adhesive. We've already mitigated all that dimension with the Instant Dimension foam tape, so I can use my tape runner adhesive to adhere the rest of these layers to my white card base. I finished that off with some of those Dazzling Diamond Stellar Sequins again, and that finishes off card number 2. I love all the texture and dimension on these card fronts. These are very simple cards, but having that textured and dimensional background created with a 3D embossing folder or a die really adds to the overall finished look of these very simple cards. Be sure to leave me a comment below and let me know which of these 2 card projects is your favorite, or what was your favorite tip that I gave you in this video. I want to remind you, I have links to the featured products used in these projects in the YouTube description below. So be sure to check that out if you're looking for something in particular, or you can head on over to the coordinating blog post. That will be linked below as well. Over there, you're going to find more still shots, more information, and a complete list of supplies. I want to say thank you so much for stopping by and hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed these projects, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications here so you don't miss any of the paper crafting and card making video tutorials. Thanks again for being here. I'm so glad you're here, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the very end. You know, if you've made it this far, you are one of my favorites. To subscribe to my channel, go ahead and click the button on the left side of the screen. And here's a couple more video tutorials I thought you might enjoy.